The missing mainland it required 375 years to discover. It took researchers 375 years to find the eighth landmass of the world, which has been hiding by not really trying to hide from the start. Yet, secrets actually remain. It was 1642 and Abel Tasman was on a mission. The accomplished Dutch mariner, who donned a showy mustache, rugged goatee and inclination for unpleasant equity, he later attempted to balance a portion of his team on an inebriated impulse, was certain of the presence of a huge landmass in the southern side of the equator, and resolved to discover it. At that point, this part of the globe was still to a great extent strange to Europeans, however they had an unshakable conviction that there should be an enormous landmass there, preemptively named Terra Australis, to adjust their own mainland in the north. The obsession dated back to ancient Roman occasions, however just presently was it going to be tried. In 2017, a gathering of geologists hit the features when they reported their disclosure of Zealandia, Te Reo a Maui in the Maori language. A tremendous mainland of 1.89 million square miles, 4.9 million square kilometers, it is around multiple times the size of Madagascar. Despite the fact that the world's reference books, guides and web indexes had been resolute that there are only 7 landmasses for quite a while, the group unquestionably educated the world that this wasn't right. There are 8 all things considered, and the most recent expansion breaks every one of the records, as the littlest, most slender, and most youthful on the planet. The catch is that 94% of it is submerged, with simply a small bunch of islands, like New Zealand, pushing out from its maritime profundities. It had been hiding by not really trying to hide from the start. This is an illustration of how something clear can require a long time to reveal, says Andy Tulloch, a geologist at the New Zealand Crown Research Institute GNS Science, who was important for the group that found Zealandia. Be that as it may, this is only the start. 4 years on and the landmass is as confounding as could be expected, its insider facts enviously watched underneath 6,560 feet, 2 kilometers of water. How could it be framed? What used to live there? Also, how long has it been submerged? A difficult revelation. Indeed, Zealandia has consistently been hard to contemplate. Over a century after Tasman found New Zealand in 1642, the British guide producer James Cook was sent on a logical journey toward the southern half of the globe. His authority directions were to notice the death of Venus between the Earth and the Sun, to compute the distance away the Sun is. Thus, on the 14th of August, Tasman set sail from his organization's base in Jakarta, Indonesia, with 2 little ships and traveled west, at that point south, at that point east, at last winding up at the South Island of New Zealand. His first experience with the neighborhood Maori individuals, who are thought to have settled there a few centuries sooner, went poorly. On day 2, a few rowed out on a kayak, and slammed a little boat that was passing messages between the Dutch boats. 4 Europeans passed on. Afterward, the Europeans terminated a gun at 11 additional kayaks. It's not realized what befallen their objectives. What's more, that was the finish of his central goal. Tasman named the game-changing area Moordenaars, Murderers, Bay, with little feeling of incongruity, and cruised home half a month later without having gone to this new land. While he accepted that he had for sure found the incredible southern mainland, clearly, it was not really the business ideal world he had visualized. He didn't return. At this point, Australia was at that point thought about, yet the Europeans thought it was not the unbelievable mainland they were searching for. Afterward, it was named after Terra Australis when they adjusted their perspectives. Little did Tasman know, he was correct from the beginning. There was a missing landmass. Yet, he additionally conveyed with him a fixed envelope, which he was told to open when he had finished the main undertaking. This contained a highly confidential mission to find the southern landmass, which he ostensibly cruised straight finished, prior to arriving at New Zealand. The primary genuine signs of Zealandia's presence were accumulated by the Scottish naturalist Sir James Hector, who went to a journey to study a progression of islands off the southern shore of New Zealand in 1895. Subsequent to considering their topography, he presumed that New Zealand is the remainder of a mountain chain that shaped the peak of an extraordinary mainland region that extended far toward the south and east, and which is currently lowered. In spite of this early leap forward, the information on a potential Zealandia stayed dark, and next to no occurred until the 1960s. Things happen pretty gradually in this field, says Nick Mortimer, a geologist at GNS Science who drove the 2017 investigation. At that point during the 1960s, geologists at long last concurred on a meaning of what a landmass is, comprehensively, a topographical territory with a high height, wide assortment of rocks, and a thick outside. It likewise must be enormous. You can't be a small piece, says Mortimer. This gave geologists something to work with. On the off chance that they could gather the proof, they could demonstrate that the eighth landmass was genuine. In any case, the mission slowed down. Finding a landmass is interesting and costly, and Mortimer calls attention to that there was no desperation. At that point in 1995, the American geophysicist Bruce Luyendijk again depicted the locale as a mainland and recommended calling it Zealandia. From that point, Tulloch depicts its revelation as an outstanding bend. Around a similar time, the Joined Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea came into power, lastly gave some genuine inspiration. It expresses that nations can broaden their lawful domains past their exclusive economic zone, which arrives at 200 nautical miles, 370 kilometers, out from their coastlines, to guarantee their expanded mainland rack, with every one of the mineral wealth and oil this incorporates. In the event that New Zealand could demonstrate that it was essential for a bigger landmass, it could build its domain by multiple times. Unexpectedly, there was a plenitude of subsidizing for outings to study the territory, and the proof continuously developed. With each rock test that was gathered, the situation for Zealandia improved. The last thrive came from satellite information, which can be utilized to follow minuscule varieties in the Earth's gravity across various pieces of the covering to plan the ocean bottom. With this innovation, Zealandia is obviously noticeable as a deformed mass nearly as extensive as Australia. At the point when the mainland was at long last divulged to the world, it opened quite possibly the most sizable oceanic regions on the planet. It is somewhat cool, says Mortimer. Looking at this logically, every landmass in the world has various nations on it, but there are just 3 regions on Zealandia. Notwithstanding New Zealand, the mainland includes the island of New Caledonia, a French settlement renowned for its amazing tidal ponds, and the little Australian regions of Lord Howe Island and Ball's Pyramid. The last was depicted by one 18th-century traveller as seeming not to be bigger than a boat. A baffling extending. Zealandia was initially important for the old supercontinent of Gondwana, which was framed around 550 million years prior and basically lumped together all the land in the southern side of the equator. It involved a corner on the eastern side, where it lined a few others, including half of West Antarctica and all of eastern Australia. At that point around 105 million years prior, because of a cycle which we don't totally see yet, Zealandia began to be pulled away, says Tulloch. Mainland covering is normally around 40 kilometers profound, fundamentally thicker than maritime outside layer, which will in general be around 10 kilometers. As it was stressed, Zealandia wound up being extended such a lot of that its hull currently just broadens 20 kilometers, 12.4 miles down. At last, the wafter slight mainland sank, however not exactly to the degree of ordinary maritime outside layer, and vanished under the ocean. Notwithstanding being slender and lowered, geologists realize that Zealandia is a mainland due to the sorts of rocks found there. Mainland covering will in general be comprised of molten, transformative and sedimentary rocks, like stone, schist and limestone, while the seafloor is normally made of volcanic ones like basalt. However, there are as yet numerous questions. The surprising birthplaces of the eighth landmass make it especially fascinating to geologists, and all around confounding. For instance, it's as yet not satisfactory how Zealandia figured out how to remain together when it's so dainty and not crumble into minuscule miniature landmasses. Another secret is actually when Zealandia wound up submerged, and whether it has ever, indeed, comprised of dry land. The parts that are as of now above ocean level are edges that shaped as the Pacific and Australian structural plates folded together. Tulloch says assessment is part regarding whether it was constantly lowered separated from a couple of little islands, or once totally dry land. This likewise brings up the issue of what lived there. With its gentle environment and 39 million sq mile, 101 million sq km, range, Gondwana itself was home to a huge swath of vegetation, including the initial four-limbed land creatures and later, a wealth of the biggest to ever live, the titanosaurs. Things being what they are, could the stones of Zealandia be studded with their safeguarded remains? A discussion about dinosaurs. Fossilized land creatures are uncommon in the southern half of the globe, yet the remaining parts of a few were found in New Zealand during the 1990s, including the rib bone of a monster, since a long time ago followed, since quite a while ago necked dinosaur, a sauropod, a beaky herbivorous dinosaur, a hypsilophodont, and a heavily clad dinosaur, an ankylosaur. At that point in 2006, the foot bone of an enormous meat-eater, perhaps a sort of allosaur, was found in the Chatham Islands, around 500 miles, 800 kilometers, east of the South Island. Vitally, the fossils all date to after the mainland of Zealandia split from Gondwana. Notwithstanding, this doesn't really mean there were dinosaurs meandering over most of Zealandia. These islands may have been safe havens while the rest was suffocated, as it is presently. There's a long discussion about this, about whether it's feasible to have land creatures without non-stop land, and whether without it, they would have been snuffed out, says Sutherland. The situation starts to get interesting with one of New Zealand's strangest and most cherished occupants, the kiwi, a dumpy, flightless bird with bristles and hair like quills. Strangely, its nearest relative isn't believed to be the moa, which is important for a similar gathering, the ratites, and lived on similar island until its elimination 500 years prior, yet the much more Goliath elephant bird, which followed the backwoods of Madagascar until as of late as 800 years prior. The finding has persuaded that the two birds advanced from a typical progenitor that lived on Gondwana. It required 130 million years to completely separate, however when it did, it gave up pieces which have since been dispersed all over the globe, framing South America, Africa, Madagascar, Antarctica, Australia, the Arabian Peninsula, the Indian subcontinent, and Zealandia. This, thus, recommends that at any rate a piece of now lowered Zealandia has stayed above ocean level the entire time. Besides around 25 million years prior the whole landmass, even potentially the aggregate of New Zealand, is thought to have been plunged submerged. It was believed that every one of the plants and creatures more likely than not colonized a short time later, says Sutherland. So what was the deal? In spite of the fact that it's unrealistic to gather fossils from the ocean bottom of Zealandia straightforwardly, researchers have been plumbing its profundities by boring. As a matter of fact, the most supportive and particular fossils are the ones which structure in the extremely shallow oceans, says Sutherland. Since they leave a record, there are zillions and zillions of minuscule, little fossils that are unmistakable. In 2017, a group attempted the most broad overviews of the area up until now, and bored more than 4,101 feet, 1,250 meters, into the seabed at 6 distinct destinations. The centers that they gathered contained dust from land plants, just as spores and the shells of living beings that lived in warm, shallow oceans. On the off chance that you have water, which is just 10 meters, 33 feet, profound or something like this, at that point there's a decent possibility that there was land around too, says Sutherland, who clarifies that the dust and spores likewise allude to the likelihood that Zealandia was not exactly as lowered as was suspected. Another waiting secret can be found in Zealandia's shape. In the event that you take a gander at a topographical guide of New Zealand, there are two things that truly stick out, says Sutherland. One of these is Alpine Fault, a plate limit that runs along the South Island and is so huge, it tends to be seen from space. The second is that the topography of New Zealand, just as that of the more extensive landmass, is strangely twisted. Both are part in two by an even line, which is the place where the Pacific and Australian structural plates meet. At this accurate point, it would seem that somebody has taken the lower half and curved it away, so not exclusively do the already constant strips of rock presently don't arrange, yet they are nearly at right points. A simple clarification for this is that the structural plates moved, and some way or another distorted them flabby. Be that as it may, precisely how or when this happened is still absolutely uncertain. There are different understandings, however this is a significant enormous obscure thing, says Tulloch. Sutherland clarifies that the mainland is probably not going to surrender every one of its privileged insights at any point in the near future. It's very difficult to make revelations, when everything is 2 kilometers, 1.2 miles, submerged, and the layers that you need to test are 500 meters, 1,640 feet, underneath the seabed too, he says. It's truly difficult to go out and investigate a landmass like that. Thus, it simply takes a great deal of time, cash and exertion to go out in ships and study locales. In the case of nothing else, the world's 8th mainland definitely shows that, almost 400 years after Tasman's journey, there is still a lot to be found. Thanks for watching. Bye now.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to Life is Often if you haven't already. Click the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest content.